Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps back. For real this time. I am here, unlike last time where it was just a static picture. I heard that was an interesting Lightforge. How did you fare last week?
I mean, I think you look just like a static picture right now. If you're watching on the YouTube or Twitch, I mean, I don't see a lot of difference. It looks like you haven't aged at all in these past 2 weeks.
No, there's a huge difference. Funny enough, I am actually wearing the exact same hoodie.
I was
So
about to
it
say
is
you
the
actually
same
look
thing.
the same. It's just your
It's like
glasses,
suddenly,
your
yeah.
hair, your shirt.
So, and this was not planned, by the way. We weren't like, hey, you should wear the same thing. No, my wardrobe is just that limited, guys. Anyways, we don't want to spend the next hour or so talking about my wardrobe. It's not that kind of podcast. We're going to talk about the meta. But first, we want to give you guys an update on the leaderboard because the August leaderboards are out. And according to the Blizzard announcement made just a few days ago, we have the top 150 players from NA and EU as well. So give a shout out to the top 10. Number one is Boozer.
Hey,
Yeah, congrats, Boozer, with an average of 8.8 wins. That is amazing. That is seriously awesome. And rounding out the top 10 is Bouncy Bear, Asian letters that I can't pronounce because it's in Korean. A-Dubs Middle Educated C at number 6. Congrats to Collins. Coffin, Ice, Uther Duel, and Death Gale. Also, many other familiar faces and names in the list. But congrats to all who grinded it out and made the leaderboard in August.
it's a good month. It's a good time. We're in a good meta. Like, not, like certain metas come around and you see the leaderboard and you're like, okay, that's great. They did really well in a particular meta. But this one it's a mix of figuring out the meta really quick and we're back in a fundamentals meta. So I think it's a very, this is a good month to have gotten a good score in.
Yep. And I especially want to give a shout out to Boozer, not just because he reached number one, but after he reached number one, he wrote a very long post on Arena HS. You guys can go there right now and read it. The post is titled "No words to describe the feeling, but thousands of words to describe the journey." And that's what Boozer does. He goes and describes the journey that it took to get number one NA. And he provides a lot of stats, but most importantly, what he does is he talks about the difficulties he had, and he lays out because he had a blog back in 2016, just saying month by month what his record was.
Is it a continuous blog that's been active since 2016?
No, it hasn't been continuous,
okay.
But to cut his. First of all, you guys should go read it if you're interested in leaderboarding or just, improvement and you need a little bit of extra motivation, because I read the entire thing and it was incredibly motivational. But what it shows is sort of him just stagnating and plateauing through 2016 and then taking like 10 months off of Hearthstone and really coming back at the end of 2017 and once again struggling because he didn't play for a long time, but then figuring it out, and then using all this previous knowledge and then just really getting into the game. But I think it's very inspirational for not only leaderboard players but players who want to improve, but they're just like, I'm stuck at 3 wins, I'm stuck at 5 wins, I'm stuck at 6.5 wins. And I just don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Well, this is a guy who plateaued for a while, and I don't want to put words into his mouth, but it seemed like he was really struggling for a while there, and now he's number one NA, right? It just goes to show you that through persistence and a lot of hard work, you too can be number one NA.
Yeah. I know some people who are maybe trying to get to. They're maybe at 5 wins and they're like, oh, I don't know if I can become an infinite player. Not I don't know if I could do the things it takes, but actually doubting their intellectual ability or like actual just like innate ability to grasp this game. It's not that complicated. It's not easy to describe how to get better always, because it's not like something like, I mean, we put a lot of time into studying how to improve in this game and how the game functions, but this is hardly like something like that you would learn in school, right? Like those have been studied for like generations, like a lot of science, a lot of PhDs going into this stuff. And Hearthstone's not like that. This is not the same rigor of study on how to educate and how to improve, but it doesn't mean that it's not kind of the same, and at a lower level of kind of intellectual like barrier. It's a lot of strategy, and it's a lot of knowing like what the meta is and a whole bunch of other things that you eventually piece together more and more. Just if you're feeling stuck, you may be stuck, but it's a temporary thing. You may be stuck for now. Like, if you want to get better, don't give up, or don't ultimately give up. I feel like when it comes to being like an infinite player or whatever, there's not a lot of people that I would say like, oh, that person will just never be an infinite player. Like, because they like suck too much of the game, or like they just don't get it. It's like, yeah, they don't get it right now, but there's nothing inherently blocking them from getting it at some point, right? It could be a light bulb moment. It could be a lot of small improvements incrementally. Sometimes it's going to be frustrating, but stick with it.
Hearthstone is the ultimate sort of level playing field, right? It's not like a game in which you have these physical demands.
All right.
It's not like something.
Speak for yourself, all right? Hearthstone is very physically demanding on my mind and on my body.
It is,
and I struggle to keep up with it sometimes. And especially when I'm streaming, you guys see it, and you're like, "Oh, what happened there?" I looked at it, and I'm like, "The game got to me." Like I couldn't click fast enough. I don't know. I couldn't think through fast enough. I wasn't evaluating the rope with it.
Exactly. If you just thought faster, which is also improvement. But like what I mean is, it's not like CS:GO, right? Or even Overwatch, in which for some characters, like you just reach an age in which you're just like, dude, you're never gonna be pro level, right? It's not possible because your reflexes are just not fast enough. Hearthstone, you can, because it just takes practice, knowing the meta.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You have to know all of the metals, which is why, but you have to know the meta, and you just have to put the time in, right? That's it, like time and effort. So it's a beautiful thing. And this is why I love the fact that Boozer wrote such a long post. Yeah. And you guys should go read it. I read it, and it was very motivational for me as well. Am I going to go for the leaderboards again? Not anytime soon, but it was very motivational.
Yeah. I remember when you were number one in on the leaderboard, like a lifetime, also known as
a lifetime ago,
literally like 14 months ago or something like that. And you talked a lot about your journey, and I think some other number one players have talked a bit about their journey, but not like to the depth, right? Like it really seemed to be like you had a lot to say about the process of actually leaderboarding, like beyond like the process of like playing Hearthstone Arena. And I'm glad there's someone else out there that's like as focused on that aspect of it, like as it was happening too. So you get a very good perspective there.
Yep, definitely. Okay, so we want to talk about the meta, because for the past couple of Lightforges, we've talked about like broad general stuff, and part of it is just because of my vacation plans
like
getting in the way.
The last like 4 podcasts could literally be listened to in any meta and it would sound the same, because it's about very fundamental Hearthstone stuff. Like none of that stuff will ever matter like half of what they matter now. Like less than that, I mean. Like no matter how crazy they make the arena.
So we want to talk about the top 2 classes right now in the arena, based on HS Replay stats, which is number 1 Warlock and number 2 Rogue. Warrior is actually number 3.
Yeah,
we're not going to talk about that. Yeah. We're not going to talk about that today. We can talk about that next week, perhaps. It is very interesting. But this week we're going to talk about Warlock and Rogue, which HS Replay has sort of shown that those are the top 2 classes generally. And also Boozer, who got number 1 last month, spam those two classes predominantly. 11 rogue runs and 10 warlock runs. So what we're gonna talk about today is why are these classes at the top? What makes them so good, and how do you play against it? Right?
Yep.
We're back to deep fried meta, the good old deep fried meta.
Good old deep fried meta. So the first thing to note is I would disagree with Warlock right now being in the same league as Rogue in terms of how easy it is to get a high average win rate with it. You can't disagree with the numbers. Warlock is getting a higher average win rate overall, but I think for a top player, for someone who's like doing all the things right, Rogue is in a class by itself right now.
Okay. Yep. And look, this is also this is something in which you've always liked Rogue a lot. I have also always liked Rogue a lot, right? And it's not like the difference between those two is super high. If you look at the stats,
it goes the other way. Like I think, right? Because Warlock is higher win rate than Rogue. It has been, except for like I think the first few days. I think the first few days Rogue was on top, and then Warlock kind of overtook Rogue on the average win rates, and has stayed there.
Definitely. Okay, so I think that's fair, but you would also just agree that these are two really, really good classes.
Yeah, these are very powerful classes.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about number one on HS Replay, Warlock. So let's lay out, first of all, why is it number one? What makes it so good? And we begin with initiative and board clears, right? This is going to be a big reason why Warlocks are so good right now. And I want to throw a few numbers at you guys first, and then we can break it down a little bit. So if you go to HS Replay and you look at the top 10 most common cards found in Warlock decks, 7 of the top most common cards have initiative. And this is, as we stated in previous Lightforges, this is in a meta in which initiative is harder to get now than in previous metas. Initiative board clears are harder to get. And let's look at, some of the cards that Warlocks have in bunches. So these are like past that stat, these are some of the more common cards. Warlocks have 1.2 Mortal Coils, 1.2 Defiles, 1.2 Shadow Bolts, 1.2 Hellfires, 1.2 Drain Souls, 1.1 Shadow Flame, so on and so forth. Like they have more than one of these cards. And cards like Defile, Shadow Flame, Hellfire, super good AoEs.
Super misbucketed.
Super misbucketed.
Underbucketed.
Exactly.
Extremely underbucketed.
And we will see if you look at the buckets.
All right, you want me to go through the buckets quickly?
Oh, okay. You could. I was gonna do that, but you can.
Oh, okay. Do you have the numbers handy?
Huh?
Do you have the buckets handy?
Well, yeah. I have the Lightforge.com.
Okay. So the Lightforge.com. We were looking for the bucket information. We've had it for a few months now, and I would say they continue to be updated, but like Blizzard hasn't updated the buckets yet, so we just have the buckets that they gave us when they released this expansion. Hopefully that'll change, and the script that our team has written we'll see how well that works, because we actually haven't like tested it yet with a new one. But anyway, Blizzard has to update the buckets first, and one of the things that's going to be updated when they update the bucket are all these board clears for Warlocks. Defile is in the second half of the second bucket. Defile is one of the best cards in the game. Hands down, ask any arena player. Don't know why it's there. Just it continues to confuse me. Hellfire is also one of the best arena cards in the game. I think there's a little more disagreement on that one, but we have it rated as a 200 score, which is pretty insane for any class that's not Warlock. Warlock actually has a couple of these. Twisting Nether, also in the second half of the second bucket. So you have 3 giant board clears that are all in the same bucket, which gives you a lot of consistency in being able to get some of these into your decks. And then you have Shadow Flame in the fourth bucket, the bottom of the fourth bucket. We rate Shadow Flame at 176. So in our mind, Shadow Flame should be in the first bucket along with all these other cards, but Shadow Flame's in the fourth bucket, so it's a very good value pick.
Yeah, I wanted to especially highlight the fourth bucket. Like The bottom of the fourth bucket, this is where you get your heavy value, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not meaning value cards, but like the bottom of the fourth bucket has Shadow Flame, Doomguard, Shadow Bolt, right? That's insane. It's like if you get basically a fourth bucket pick or the in-betweener between fourth and fifth bucket pick, right? And if you have these, this is an area in which, like, if you're a Warlock, you can just really get ahead of other decks that you face in the arena by picking something here that is really not supposed to be here,
Mm-hmm.
right? Doomguard, Shadow Flame, and also if you just pick a Shadow Bolt, that's just one more initiative card,
Yeah,
right?
so Shadow Bolt is
Uh,
not like that heavily misbucketed.
no,
We had it at 124. We would probably put it in, I don't know, the third bucket or something. It's in the fourth bucket. But still, it's a good card.
it's a very good card, and it's just more initiative. It's a bailout card,
Yeah.
right? It's a bailout card for a class that really needs to preserve face. So
Mhm.
it's just another card in which, like, if they have that big minion, oh well, that's been erased. So this is why Warlocks are so good right now. Like, they have tons of initiative, and they have tons of initiative in every single bucket. So that's kind of reason number one on why they are so good.
And you had to compare these cards with, like, what other class has a ton of initiative right now, right? Shaman. Shaman's always had a ton of initiative. Why is Shaman not amazing right now? Shaman's kind of bad right now. It's not that bad. But it's definitely not anywhere near Warlock Rogue levels. And you just got to look at where their initiative is bucketed. Shaman initiative is bucketed really high. You get offered a lot of them, but they're all your good cards, right? Your Volcano, top bucket. Your Storm, like top two buckets. It's all there. And you, on the other hand, you take a look at Warlock, and you actually get value while you're drafting in a particular style. It's kind
Yeah,
of not fair.
it's a huge difference between sort of like, look, both classes have really good cards, but one is more properly bucketed,
Mm-hmm.
which just makes the class worse,
Yep.
right? It's like Volcano and Lightning Storm. It's not because those cards are worse. In fact, we've also talked about this before. Warlocks, the cards in general tend to be, kind of have to be, because of the hero power,
Mm-hmm.
worse than other classes,
Yep.
right? To balance the fact that, man, its hero power is just extraordinarily good. So like, that is being held against them. But at the same time, if you just misbucket it, like Shadow Flame in the bottom of the fourth bucket, they are going to dominate.
Yep. Do you want to? Can I talk about the neutrals for Warlock?
You can talk about the neutrals as well. All right, sure, go ahead.
Okay. So the neutrals for the Warlock suffer from this systemic issue when it comes to the bucketing. And we talked about this when we talked about what Blizzard can continue doing to improve the bucket system. The bucket system for neutrals basically it's forced to. Blizzard cannot ever deviate and put one neutral card into different buckets for different classes. Every neutral card is in the same bucket for every class, no matter how silly or stupid it is. So if you had a card that's like a 2-mana 3/2, if you are mage, win the game, that would be like around where the Raptor bucket is. Why? Because all the other classes, it's just a 3/2. Even if a mage, it just wins you the game, literally. So that's how Blizzard buckets, and it's like, it's not a bug. They just kind of like, they're intentionally doing it, but it's a silly, stupid thing to do. It's just something that that they just have not fixed yet, right? Or like have not featured yet. I don't even know what to say about it. And it doesn't cause a ton of problems normally when you're looking at it. There's a few cards in which you get to a certain point where you're like, oh, well, I have to pick this card for this class now. But they're kind of few and with good distance in between. The problem really comes from when you have all of your cards that fit this description. All neutrals are better for Warlock than for other classes. Every one of them. Now, cards that have like taunt attached to them or heal, for example, are even better than that. But even setting those aside, all neutral cards are better for Warlock. Why? Especially small neutral cards. Why? Because they have a hero power. Then their hero power completely skews how cards work. Like, your conception of card advantage as a Warlock is entirely different. And same if you're facing a Warlock. It's entirely different than against any other classes. Like if you're playing against a Warlock or you're playing as a Warlock the same way you play against or as any other class, there's not even a single class that's even remotely similar. You're doing it very wrong, and you're suffering probably at least a 15, if not 20% inefficiency in your wins for being a same skilled player. That's and we bring that up to kind of like say, oh, you should treat playing against Warlocks very differently, more than usually like as the Warlock, because obviously you should play each class differently. But when you're dealing with a bucketing system, what it means is there are more opportunities to get a higher than, like, to get a lower, a card that is better than the bucket that it is currently in for Warlock than for any other class by such a long shot. Because every single pick you're offered will have at least one, if not multiple, of those opportunities. Because it's every neutral card that is like below 4 mana. Like every single neutral card.
Right. And herein sort of lies one of the problems with a bucketing system generally. It's like you have to make sure it's right. The idea behind it is great. And, the idea behind it is something that ADWCTA and I have always been like, yeah, like we like this idea and what it should create. But right now for Warlock, for example, you also see the effects of like when things aren't bucketed properly. And it can just reach a tipping point in which it's like, wow, this not only creates a quote boring meta that some people have talked about, it creates just this situation where you look at Warlock decks and you're just like, man, how is this deck so good? That's just how Warlock decks are,
That's what happens when they put that bucketing system in place here. And we're not saying it's like terrible to face a Warlock or Warlocks auto win or anything like that. It's like, what do our Warlocks, like 54% win rate?
Yeah, 54 exactly.
Yeah,
as of this
moment, for like, I guess, above average players on HS Replay, that's not balanced, but it's not terrible. We've been in way worse metas. This is not even going to make like a top 10 list of unbalanced metas, right? So it's not terrible, but there's definitely, Blizzard has their thumb on the scale for Warlocks.
Yeah. So look, for Warlocks at this moment, I also wanted to elaborate a little bit more on what you said, how the Warlock hero power makes all neutral cards better. It's even a little bit worse because the Warlock hero power makes all neutral cards better, but disproportionately so for lower cost cards. Yes. So it's like if, let's say generally, like overall, like, you're adding 2 points of value, whatever value is, I'm not going to define it, right? Whatever points of value to neutral cards. For something like Young Priestess, it'll add like 5 points of value to it. This theoretical value, right?
And if you're wondering what the theoretical value adds is, just like look at our tier list. Our tier list is automatically adjusting for this thing that we're talking about because it's a hero power thing. So you can just see how much more neutral cards are worth than other cards, and it's usually more than 5 points.
Yeah. So this also, brings us to just the hero power directly. We've kind of skirted around the hero power, talked about it a little bit, but I want to just address it head on and exactly what it does, right? So what the hero power does is it allows you in a snowball tempo board-centric meta to aggressively take the board, right? To more aggressively say, I can afford to draft a little bit lower. I can afford to just spend my cards, and then afterwards I can tap to get card advantage. Or sometimes, and this is the disgusting part, Warlocks don't even have to tap. Just the fact that you're on the board first and you can make advantageous trades. Once again, the old-fashioned way to win at Hearthstone, right? Get on the board, make advantageous trades, snowball, and win from there. It allows them to just do that more often as well. So the hero power, it allows them to do that, but it, like, 50% of the time, it's also just sort of like a safety net that they don't even need, because of the fact that, they have drafted low and they're able to get on the board and make advantageous trades.
Yep. Okay. So Warlocks are good. Why do I think Warlock is not in the same league as Rogue? Because Warlocks have weaknesses. Rogues right now have no weakness. Warlocks have weaknesses. And these
Yeah.
are not just weaknesses in terms of like, oh, I play a Warlock, and it's like, these are draft weaknesses that are 100% unavoidable as the drafter. If
Okay.
Blizzard does
Yeah.
not offer you certain cards, you don't have a good deck. You don't even you don't have a deck that could go past like 5-6 wins, and that's fine, right? If you're like a normal class and you have a bad deck and you get 5-6 wins, you're totally happy. You sign it off, you move on with your life. But if you're a rogue and you don't have good cards, you're gonna get 7-8 wins. That's the difference. That's why your Warlock is not going to average as high as your Rogue. I think if you're a very good player that can ensure that the bottom is not as low, because Rogues can let you do that. And the difference there is 2-drops. Rogues don't need any 2-drops. Warlocks kind of need a bunch of 2-drops, or they need a bunch of board clears. And Merps went over the numbers for you about the kinds of board clears that Warlocks have and how many you have like per deck on average, right? Well, the average comes out to be something like 3, and the reality of 3 isn't you will have 3 board clears every run. It's a quarter of the time you'll have 1 board clear. So you can't ever draft as if you're going to get board clears, or you could, but then it screws up the rest of your draft if you don't on those 25% chances. There's nothing you can do about it. So what do? Maybe you draft low, maybe you go for the curve. That's fine. As Warlock, you'll get plenty of 1-drops. Your chances of actually getting a good number of 2-drops, just like any other class, possibly worse than other classes because you don't really have like a lot of 2-drops in your offering pool, you won't get enough 2-drops. It's going to happen like half the time that you won't get enough 2-drops drafting as Warlock. And Rogues won't get enough 2-drops either, but Rogues don't need 2-drops. Rogues have a hero power. So Rogues have a much higher floor. I guess we're going to get into this in Rogue, but the Warlock can screw you in 2 ways right out of the gates in the draft. And there's nothing you can do about it. There's no way to draft around it. There's not... I mean, you can mitigate the downside a little bit, but you're still going to end up with a bad deck. And those decks are guaranteed to not go far because they're, like, barely functional. And that's a problem that is felt very keenly by Warlock because their hero power forces you to design your decks in certain ways. And if you don't, you just don't get as much power out of it. So sometimes you can't. Like, sometimes when I'm drafting Warlock, you'll hear me go halfway through and be like, well, I guess we're not hero powering a lot after all. After, the first 15 cards, I'm like, oh, we're going to hero power a lot. And then you just don't get offered the cards that would allow you to use the hero power, namely the cards that consistently put you on the board. And you're like, well, what do you do? Now you just have a kind of a gimp deck with a gimped hero power. And again, that's not to say this is like any weaker than the regular classes, but you then become a regular class. Whereas you're never a regular class when you're rogue.
Yep. No, I think it's good to highlight sort of these weaknesses, and because I think it leads into a topic that I want to talk about for both of these classes, which is how do you beat Warlocks, right? And how do you beat Rogues? Since you have sort of identified some of these weaknesses, you wanna talk about how you beat Warlocks?
I mean, generally you hit face because hit face is their card advantage, and Warlocks have like, I don't know, more than a 50% chance of relying on card advantage as one of their win conditions. Normally, when you trade, you have tempo, which is good. So you have more initiative the next turn because your minions are alive, theirs are dead. You guarantee stuff. You guarantee more tempo, more initiative, all good. But you also get more card advantage because you're doing good trades. Against Warlock, every time you're doing a good trade rather than hitting their face, you're losing card advantage. So every time in the normal scheme of the game, you would be getting card advantage on people. You're not actually just not getting card advantage on them, you're actively losing card advantage on them because that 4 damage to their face would cost them 2 cards, whereas that positive trade probably cost them like half a card's worth of card advantage. So you have to be aware of what you're giving the Warlock, because Hearthstone's attacker chooses. You kind of decide whether you're hitting their face or making a good trade on the board. So you need to always be evaluating, what do I need relative to my opponent? Am I okay with them getting card advantage right now? If so, fine, I trade. Do I not? Do I need to either like kill them, which obviously you go face, or make sure that they don't have the card advantage later on in the game against me because I'm a card advantage deck and they can out card advantage me? Then I have to go face. And you have to make this weird evaluation that you don't have to do with any other class every single turn. That you have a decision to make of whether you go face or go on the board.
Yeah. So, okay. I would say that these days, you have to expect to face and beat Warlocks,
Yes.
right? Like they are very prevalent, especially like after 3-4 wins. I see a decent amount of Warlocks. So you have to be prepared to beat them because they are not only just prevalent, but we've highlighted the strengths that they have, right? ADWCTA is correct. You definitely have to be aggressive. And one of the pitfalls that you just can't fall into, I want to highlight, and this was told to me by Dr. Stein during my stream on Friday, in which I was drafting a mage, and I came to this early pick in which it was Frostbolt, Arcanologist, Pyroblast, and I was like, oh, based on how this deck is going, I think maybe Arcanologist, maybe Frostbolt. And Dr. Stein, he was like, no, Merps, you have to pick Pyroblast. I'm like, okay, explain why you think of this so strongly. And Dr. Stein, and basically everyone else, has been playing a lot more than I have. And he's just like, because Warlocks are somewhat of a gatekeeper. And he's like, and it seems like you're trying to make this kind of mid-rangey deck. And he's like, and the deck you're making auto loses to Warlocks because what you're trying to do, Warlocks will just do 100% better than you. So he's like, you can't play their game. It's like you play in a similar fashion to how the Warlock wants to play, you 100% lose because of not only the hero power, but as we discussed,
and especially if you're mage, right? Warlock's always been a counter to mage.
Oh yeah. Warlocks have always been somewhat of a counter, right? And they're just like, so Dr. Stein was just like, you pick Pyroblast 100% here, and he's like, and you go faster. And I did. My deck sucked, but I think what Dr. Stein told me is 100% correct, right? And it might be telling that the next draft, I was just like, I picked Shaman. I was like, I'm playing Token Shaman. I don't care. And I made a couple of weird picks, but it was, Token Shaman, early curve, Bloodlust, and I went 12.
Yep.
So, and once again, a few of the opponents that I faced were Warlocks that try to play that style. But I'm just like, no, I'm going to kill you before you outvalue me, before you do all of your fancy shenanigans, right? I am just going to kill you.
Yeah.
So that's definitely the way to go. Like this is a long way of saying don't fall into the trap of playing this sort of like, the best way to describe it is sort of like this mid-rangey style that Warlocks play, because unless you're another Warlock, you're not beating Warlocks at that kind of game.
And if you're like, well, but that's what my deck does, start hitting face earlier. Like that's all. I'm not saying you have like the best chance by doing that, but you have a better chance than if you keep trading. Because every time you trade, you give them 2 cards. Every time you trade, you give them 2 cards. And every time you hit their face, conversely, you're eliminating their ability to use their hero power, so they're even weaker. Like your incentives are all messy. Okay, so yeah. But going back to the Warlock's like weaknesses in this meta and why it's not as good as Rogue, all of those have to do with the draft. So you're kind of screwed already by the time you face a Warlock, especially at a high win rate, because they're not the Warlocks that have these problems. So if you're like running a 12-win deck and you face a bunch of Warlocks after like 6 wins, yeah, they're gonna be really good. Nothing much you could do about it because they're the decks that made it. They're not the crippled 25%, maybe 20% of Warlock decks that's dragging the overall win rate for good players down. They're the other majority of Warlock decks that's going to be pretty damn strong.
Yep. Okay, that's kind of all I want to say with Warlocks. Did you have anything else?
Nope.
All right.
So play around Defile always when a single Defile without another card will go 1 for 3. You really can't afford to let your opponent play a 2-mana card that goes 1 for 3 with you. On the other hand, if your opponent like has a minion on the board and Defile's like a 2 for 2 mana, don't worry about it. Like, that's a great time for your opponent to use Defile, because they have that Defile, and it's going to open your game up to not have them have that Defile in their hand anymore.
It's funny, isn't it? It's like, if you can like limit Defile to a 2-mana consecration, you did a good job.
Great. Good job. Wonderful play.
Yeah, it's like, just make sure it's not a 2-mana Twisting Nether.
And then when you're doing that and you're doing all this math, and you're doing all this board setup, they play Lord Godfrey, which is freaking everywhere now, and all your planning goes to hell because that is the number one card in the game according to our tier list, and for very good reason. It's a silly, silly card, and it's unplayable around an arena, and you lose. So that's another thing about Warlocks, is that they do have access to Lord Godfrey. The legendary offering rate is up by like, I don't know, like 33% or something compared to the prior meta. And it's a class card. You're going to see it a decent number of times at high win rates. No, there's no play around it. You shouldn't play around it. There's nothing, like, if you ever get killed by Lord Godfrey, pretend you won. Like, if you were winning and then Lord Godfrey came out, just pretend in your head, just be like, oh, I won that game. Because that'll make you a better player than if you're like, oh, I lost that game, but it's okay because it was Lord Godfrey. Don't even internalize the loss. Like, you won.
No, that might be the healthiest way to go about it. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. That is Warlock right there. Let's talk about
I'm not bitter. I haven't lost to like 5 Lord Godfreys in the last week and a half. Like, when you were gone, if you go through the stream, just like Lord Godfrey losses everywhere. Because you get to a certain win, and it's like, well, you know, what, like 1 in every 5 Warlock has a Lord Godfrey? Something like that? 1 in every 6, maybe? Maybe 1 in every 8? And how many of those get to like 7 wins? You have a decent chance. How many Warlocks you meet on your way to a high win rate? You're going to face your share of Lord Godfreys.
Yep. All right, so let's talk about the second class of the day, which is Rogue. Very familiar class. We've talked about Rogue so much just because it has been a dominant force in the arena for ages. But why is Rogue so good? Once again, we go back to initiative and removals, right? And once again, I think we need to go back to the buckets and just look at the fact that they have very good removals in basically all of the buckets, right? So let's look at the top bucket. You know, like these are the ones that people fear. We have Sap, Bossbond Slayer, Eviscerate, SI7, you know, just efficient stuff that, you know, whenever rogues get offered the top bucket, they are picking a premium removal, right? It's not even a choice, basically. It's like every single time they're faced with the top bucket, it's not like they have a good minion, like a super good minion there.
What about
as well.
Faldori Strider?
True, they could pick that, but like, sorry, they will always be offered.
Yeah,
at least.
And they should not be picking Faldori Strider.
Yeah. Over something like a Sap, right? You know, there might be those times in which you're just like, I have no 4-drops. I need a Faldori Strider. I have too much removal.
Fair, actually.
That is fair, like right?
A rarity these days.
But you know, in a vacuum, I think Sap is superior to Faldori Strider. And then if you look at the second...
Do you think Sap is 65 points exactly superior to Faldori Strider?
I think it is a good amount higher. I don't know about the exact score. I know that is the score that we have. But it is... It is, in my opinion,
just to give you the sense of the gap. Like, 65 is not a small number.
Yep. So, did you have more to add to that?
No,
or are you done?
I wanted to make sure that people knew 65 was a largish number.
65 is a large number.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Public service announcement. In the second bucket, you know, they have really, really good efficient removals, such as Kidnapper, Backstab, Cheap Shot, Assassinate.
Okay,
right?
So they have all these like removals and stuff. But how often do you really get offered these? I feel like I never see them. Like, when's the last time you got Vile Spine?
It seems like you have the numbers here.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you don't see them. You get offered these because rogues are very heavily hated on by the micro adjust system of Blizzard. Mm-hmm. So these top 2 buckets, especially, you're seeing. Well, the top bucket especially. The second bucket, you actually see a fair amount. I think you're gonna you're gonna be offered like one of these on average per draft. And that's, you know, that's pretty good because there's a lot of good cards. But that first bucket, that's such a low offering rate. That, I mean, it's not that you should, you know, pretend they don't exist in the arena anymore or anything like that. But it's not the same as like the Warlock power cards, right? The thing in Rogue that really like gets you cards wise are like their weird cards.
Yeah, and I was gonna talk about that as well. So I think the sort of MVP card for rogues these days, it can be found in the 4th bucket, and that's Fan of Knives.
Yeah. We
Fan
rated a
of Knives.
162. The next highest card in that bucket is a 135. That is 28 points of difference. And no, I can't do math. That is 20.
While you're doing math, I will talk about Fan of Knives.
27 points of difference, which is not as large as 60 whatever, but is also pretty large, especially for that zone.
Fan of Knives, found in the 4th bucket. According to HS Replay, it's like, will you face tons of Vilespine Slayers? No. Will you face a ton of Fan of Knives? Yes. It is tied. It is for number 2 on most copies that for a card that you'll see in a deck.
So this is what I don't understand. Like, did people just realize what we've known for the past like 2 metas, that Fan of Knives is like, ever since they started bucketing, we were like, Fan of Knives seriously under bucketed, pick Fan of Knives, like see a Fan of Knives, take a Fan of Knives, right? Like I can't count how many times I've said that on stream. We rated it this high, very highly. I don't think there's really an argument from anybody who knows the arena about how great Fan of Knives is. Blizzard's rebucketed a number of times since then. This is a freaking like classic card. This is like, everyone knows what it does. Blizzard sees the stat. Like, do people just not pick Fan of Knives?
I think as the meta has progressed and as the meta has solidified, people see what the meta has become more, right? They see the replicating menace into the 111s. They see, just the Grim Necros. They see all of just this random stuff. They see the board not get resolved. And then, because, okay, like, we are sort of early adopters, right? And not even early adopters. I think we are very good at predicting what the meta is. So you're sort of like, how has it taken people this long? It's like, well, it's like we don't even react. We predict correctly most of the time.
But like we raised Fan of Knives by like 10 points for this meta. It was already like a really high number before this meta.
Yeah, it was already really good. So, but once again, you're stating it's like, well, how did it take people this long? It's like, it's the meta settled and this is what it settled on and people responded, right? I think it's the normal speed.
Just know this is a game-winning card. Just know every rogue has it. And just know that if you're playing it, and you do sometimes, it's rogue, like you sometimes can't help it, but you're like, oh, they have a Fan of Knives, I lose. You're going to lose a lot by doing that. Not that it's necessarily the wrong play. I don't know what options you have, right? Like, and against rogue, oftentimes they limit you to very few options. But just be ready for the Fan of Knives. Possibly 2 Fan of Knives. Like, because everyone's going to take a Fan of Knife every time it's offered.
Yes. So, look, that I wanted to specifically highlight, right? As part of the reason why rogues are really good. Did you have another card that you had in mind?
No, I just wanted to talk about Fan of Knives a lot because if we're talking about rogue and you're focusing on like assassinate and like whatever, that's the wrong place to focus. The place to focus is Fan of Knives.
Oh no, I was working my way and being like, look, they have all this, but then this is where, and I know you were just like, oh no, Merps isn't talking about what I want to talk about. Why are we talking
about Eviscerate and Sap? Like that was like so like 6 metas ago.
I know, and as soon as you said that, I'm like, fine, I'll just get to whatever it is you want to get to, and I know what it is you want to get to. By the way, this wasn't pre-planned. We didn't discuss this. It's just, I think it's very, very obvious for people that play rogue right now, sort of like why Fan of Knives is good, and then not only is it good, it's under-bucketed, supremely under-bucketed, and it's just not only so good generally, it's perfect for this meta, right? Absolutely perfect. So that is the one card I really wanted to highlight. And then another thing that makes rogues just really powerful is they have a ton of cards in which you just get a lot for what you pay for, right?
They're tempo cards.
So yeah, good tempo cards. For example, cards in which you can find multiple copies of, so 1.2 copies of Crazed Chemist and 1.2 copies of Cold Blood. So basically 2 Cold Bloods, right? Like 2 cards that provide a Cold Blood. Either Cold Blood itself, which is very tempo efficient, or Crazed Chemist, which is just Cold Blood plus another body, which makes it a little bit awkward. But sometimes you also, hey, it's a 4/4 body.
Yeah,
right?
it's a body. It doesn't kill your card advantage the way Cold Blood sometimes does.
Yeah. So that is one that I also want to highlight because both, you can find 1.2 copies of in your deck, and these are the number 2 most common cards found in rogues. So you can always expect that little extra burst, right? You can always expect that very mana efficient tempo sort of gain on the board. And that's great for this meta, right? It's like it's become a lot easier for you to have something on the board to buff. And especially easy for rogues because of all the reasons we said before. And whenever you do it, you get a lot for just this 1 mana, right? Like 4 attack for 1 mana is amazingly good. So once again, another reason why Rogue is really, really good right now.
And the final reason why Rogue is really, really good right now, not final, let's just go one more. There's the obvious one we haven't even talked about. Or exactly. We kind of talked about, but...
that was my number 3 as well.
Well, so the one I'm talking about, I'm going to bring up is the card draw. They've always had really good card draw since this guy was introduced. This Elven Minstrel guy. So, that's a good safety net because a lot of times, more so than any prior meta for the last year plus, this meta is decided in a higher percentage of time. And by higher percentage of time, I mean 15% of games, maybe 10% of games, but that's still insanely high compared to what it was before. About just who runs out of cards. And that hasn't happened for a long time in the arena. And we're kind of back there now. And that's good for classes that can draw a lot of cards. What classes can draw a lot of cards? Warlock, because of the hero power, and Rogue, because they have the most card draw-y cards. And they're the 2 on top. Not a total coincidence. And
so I want to correct something, and Taro in the chat, thank you for pointing it out. So it's not 1.2 copies. It's when they have it in the deck. That's how many copies they have. It doesn't change the fact that Crazed Chemist is still, what is it? The 6th most popular card in Rogue decks. And Cold Blood is number 10-ish. But it does change the information I give. So thank you, Taro. That is, and you can go on HS Replay and see, in what percentage of decks are these cards. And I was giving you how many copies whenever there is that card. So that's my bad.
That makes sense. And you were giving that for Warlock too.
I was giving that for Warlock, yes.
So, because when you said that, I was like, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm pretty sure there's not that many board clears.
Yeah, so it's when they have it in the deck, this is how many copies they have, which is still good to know.
It's good to know, still gives it's not the number of
it's not the number
that it's there. Yeah. There's fewer board clears than what that number suggests in Warlock. And that's what I'm saying, if you're drafting as Warlock, you're not going to get your board clears in a good percentage of your deck.
Yes.
Your average is actually around 3 of board clears if you count Despicable Dreadlord and Dread Inferno as all board clears. But your chances of missing is also pretty high.
All right. So card draws. Did you have more stuff?
Well, the last stuff, the obvious stuff. Go for it. Take it home. Close us out. Why is Rogue good?
Okay. All right. Well, okay. Past the card draw. So you're done with card draw.
I'm done with card draw.
All right. Well, look, we got the hero power as well. And that hero power allows you to not draft 2s. I think, so I had a 12-win run in which I had, I think, 0 2-drops or maybe 1. I don't know. And I know you've had some success with Rogue as well. And
I haven't been drafting 2s in Rogue for more than a year and a half.
Yeah, you did it before it was cool.
Yeah.
You've always done it. And for me, I shunned away from it because I was very aggressive, right? We played Rogue very differently historically. But now I think there is basically just, I'm not saying one way, but there are less ways to play Rogue now. And it's because of the bucketing system, right? There are less ways to play Rogue now than there were previously. And why is it so good that you don't have to draft 2s? Because you could draft other stuff. That's it.
Bigger stuff, more useful stuff, initiative stuff, card drawing stuff.
Exactly. You don't just have to it not only frees you to draft bigger stuff, you can draft techie stuff, right? You can draft stuff in which that are a little more situational as well. And it just works. Like that's absolutely fine. So that already gives you a huge advantage because you're taking 5, 6 cards that you might have to draft, and you're saying, no. I'm not going to draft these cards that are number 1, small, number 2, crappy in late game situations, and number 3, just like they don't
slightly
do much, right?
overbucketed. 2-drops
Just
always
like,
slightly overbucketed.
yeah, and instead I'm taking cards that are underbucketed, that provide initiative, that are just, big solid minions for the late game. And once again, it's almost as if you are extracting value from underbucketed cards by doing this, right?
I mean, 5 to 6 cards in your deck is like a fifth to a sixth of your deck. That's a whole crap ton of cards. Like, if you're looking at percentage wise, how much better is my deck than your deck? Well, if my deck has 20% of my cards that I don't have to spend on these crappy no value or like even value cards, and I can instead get underbucketed cards or other cards that my deck actually needs, well, I'm ahead. Add on to that, if I have one less curve to worry about, the most like burdensome curve to worry about, well, now every time I'm offered a 2 or a 3, I can take a 3, which means it's very easy to complete my 3 curve. Every time I'm offered a 2 or a 4, I can take 4s, which means it's actually possible to complete my 4 curve, unlike some other classes. So the number of times that you're going to not get a curve while going for value or tempo or combos or whatever the heck you want to go for Rogue is really, 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 really tiny because you never have to draft 2. So that creates the floor that we were talking about with Rogue. That is so high right now relative to any other class. Like no other class touches it. Warlock is actually one of the classes with a lower floor than average, I think. I think it also has higher than average ceilings, which is why its win rates overall for like above average players, but not like necessarily infinite players, is going to be pretty good.
Right.
But the average, the more you care, and we do this a lot, right? Like you're wondering, like, oh, how do you find good players? Well, you find players who take a pretty crappy deck, and then they get to a decent spot with them. Why? Because you're going to get pretty crappy decks at a pretty high percentage of times, no matter what you do.
Did you know that 50% of the time you'll get a below average deck?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And so your ability to pilot that deck and where those decks end up make up a rather large percentage of your win rate normally. Now, if you're going for the leaderboard and you're looking for your 30 best, maybe you're trying to high roll anyway, maybe it matters less, right? You're like, it's easier to high roll Warlock than it is to like high roll most other classes, if not any other class. Like Warlock, Priestess side, I think Warlock maybe Shaman, but it's a very high rolly kind of class. And the floor is still low though. So like this is why I wanted to clear up right in the beginning. We'll talk about Rogue and Warlock because they're the two highest win rate classes. But they get their win rates very differently. And because of that, some classes are good for some things, some are for others. Warlocks are good for high rolling. Warlocks are good the lower your the less high you can go with a really bad, terrible rogue deck. So I measure that as your baseline fundamental skill. But when it comes to like, that's why you'll see me, for example. It's not like I'll pick Rogue a lot more than Warlock. It's more that when I pick Warlock, I don't consider it like an OP class the way I do Rogue. When I pick Rogue, I don't feel like I'm being fair. When I pick Warlock, I feel still pretty fair despite the win rate.
I think that's a good perspective, right? I like the fact that one easy way to put it is just rogues will never miss their 2-drop, right? I think that's a perfect example of the consistency that you're touting for Rogue. Not only just in the draft, but it's like, hey, you have this class that will never miss their 2-drop because they just stagger. I think that's important. All right, so how do you beat rogues, right? How do you beat rogues? The first thing, and the one that everyone thinks about, is like, wow, they're kind of like Warlocks in a way, in which they use their face. So if you want to take away their hero power, just like the way you take away the Warlock's hero power, you pressure their face, right? But more specifically, I want to talk about the strategy you want to use while building a board against rogues. And what I want to talk about is, I define it as sort of like playing in this mid zone
Okay.
I'm
I'm gonna build on your caveat for a little bit and then send you back
okay.
to the mid zone, which I totally
Yeah,
agree
let's do it.
with.
Let's do it.
That's how you beat Rogue. And so when we're saying like Merps like kind of like glossed over the fact that like you hit rogues to the face, it makes their hero power less effective, and he glossed over it because it's really not anywhere near as important as the Warlock, because you have to think about what the rogue gets from being able to hit you in the face. They get either 1 or 2 extra damage onto your board, which is not the same as like I don't know, like 2 extra cards. It's not the same trade-off here. Like Warlocks get way more from their health than rogues in that sense. Or they get the flexibility to take a lot more damage to their face and take a lot more stats off the board. But then again, they're paying for it. So you're not, and also importantly is when you're wondering about how you're trading with the rogue, you're trading tempo for tempo. If you're getting good trades on the board, you're getting good tempo. And the rogue using their face to then remove your minion off the board does not put the rogue ahead on tempo or card advantage or anything. It fixes it. It makes it all the same. So whether you hit the rogue to the face or you get a good trade on the board, it's all the same. Whereas for Warlock, we've said before, if you trade on the board, you're getting tempo. If you hit face, you're getting card advantage. So with the Warlock, you can manipulate the type of resources you want your opponent to have that's less useful to your opponent. With the rogue, you can't. The rogue is always in control. So make your choice, hit whichever, but ultimately it's going to matter a lot less because the rogue is the one with the choice of how to use their face damage.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's good. It's a good elaboration on just the simple point that I put out there, right? Okay. So let's talk about this mid zone that I mentioned.
Yep.
And I think after I put it out, like you immediately understood sort of what I'm talking about. But right now, when you're building a board, and you got to build a board nowadays, when you build a board, what you can do is, there are times in which you have all of these 1/1s, right? It's going to be more common than you think. All of these weenies, all of these 1/1s.
Phantom Knives is so good.
Yeah, and against a rogue, you can't do that, right? Fan of Knives, what do we talk about? And Fan of Knives is still extremely common with rogues, and you can't just say, well, if they have a Fan of Knives, I guess I lose. You're going to lose a decent amount if you do that. So, what you want to do...
montage of ADWCTA saying, well, if they have a Fan of Knives, I lose, followed by losing.
Oh, man. And then you have the yakety sax, song playing in the background. At the same time, you can't play purely big, right? Like those cards that we talked about, Sap, Kidnapper, etc., Assassinate, they don't appear super often, but rogues have so many of those kind of cards that altogether they have that, right? So you can't play just singular as well. What you want to do is you want to play in this mid zone. And the crappy thing is Betrayal kind of...
Yeah. It's the other card, right? You go Phantom Knives and you go Betrayal. Those are the rogues like screw you cards.
Exactly. But what you want to do is, and this also involves some reads, right? Make your reads and try to play predominantly in this mid zone where that Vile Spine doesn't screw you. At the same time, the Phantom Knives doesn't screw you. So you play in this mid zone and you keep on chipping away at them. And because what rogues can fall into is they can be in a situation in which they have a little bit too much situational cards, right? And if you give them those situations for them to use it, they'll roll over you. They'll steamroll you. But if you have made the reads and it's like, okay, I don't think they can react to this sort of board. And then a lot of times it's this mid zone, right? If you go there, and rogues a lot of times, and because I've been that rogue sometimes. I've been that rogue in which they play.
Being that rogue.
It sucks. You feel powerless because you're like, dude, I have all these powerful cards. Like I have this Vile Spine, but the biggest thing I can hit is like a 3/4. Like I'm still behind in this game, but Vile Spine is supposed to hit that Boulderfist Ogre and get you ahead, right? Like the instant flip. So if you capitalize on this sometimes weakness that rogues have, sort of box them in because of all of these situational yet powerful cards that they have a lot of, and just keep on playing in this mid zone, that is a very good way to beat rogues. And you can see how awkward it is for them. Like, I play in this zone and I pass it back to the rogue, and he's just like flipping through all of his cards. He's like, damn. It's just like, this sucks. I can't do much. It's like, am I gonna sap that 3/4? Am I gonna, vow spine? It's like, I can't do that, because that's not the game-winning play that I'm sort of banking on, that rogues these days just have. But if you give that to them, if on turn 5, you play your giant 5-drop, or on turn 6 you play your giant thing, and then they, flip it like that, that's how you lose. I'm not saying you always have the option to do it, but when you have the option, think of playing in this mid zone.
And you have this option more often than you think, and it's also not just the facing rogue things. Rogues are just especially vulnerable to it, because that's where they get all their power from. But priests are also vulnerable to the same thing. Shamans are vulnerable to the same thing. What you basically want to do is, if the opponent looks like they're trying to take advantage of a situation by like hero powering a lot, by like not committing on the board, by playing stuff that draws other cards and otherwise just like drawing other cards, they're like waiting to flip the board on you. And like Merp said, if you give them the same situation repeatedly, they can only handle it the number of times that they have the cards in their hands to handle that situation. And all the other cards they have in their hands that handle other situations are not used. So, with Rogue, because they only have Betrayal, really, to handle this mid-rangey situation, Shadowblade kind of, not really, like Perdition's Blade maybe, not really, that's the situation you want to present to them right off the bat. But if you expand this onto generally Hearthstone, you just give whatever you have the most of. Let's say if I have a hand that has like 6 large minions, I don't really have the board, that's fine. Start off by playing your least valuable large minion, then play another large minion, then play another large minion. Like, sure, they could kill your first one, sure, they may kill your second one, but if you have 6 of them, you're going to start getting value out of the ones you really want to stick. Why? Because they can only have so many hard removals, right? Same with flooding the board. If you have like 7 cards in your hand that all flood the board and generates additional minions in whatever ways, you don't care if they remove your first one, right? Like, if I have a whole bunch of, I don't know, let's say Squashlings in my hand, I'm facing another priest, I'm not afraid of a Holy Nova. Holy Nova me away, I'll just Squashling again. Another board of 5 minions, deal with that. Oh, you Holy Nova me again? I'm gonna do it again. You're gonna be out of Holy Novas at one point, and then I'm gonna have a ridiculous board. So, this is kind of a concept that you can apply to anything. Rogues are just very vulnerable to that middle area. And so that's where you should start your attack on. But if you don't have that middle area, if you're not strong in that middle area in your deck, like, play into the Phantom Knives. How many Phantom Knives are they going to have? Be prepared to get Phantom Knives. Like, don't like be like, oh, if they Phantom Knives, I lose. Like, try to wait for the situation before you fully commit to be like, oh, if they Phantom Knives, I no longer destroy them on the board because I'm so far ahead. But then have a backup being more stuff that they want to Phantom Knives. But they can't anymore because they've already used their Phantom Knives, right?
Yep. So that is how you play against rogues. Now, once again, why? The question of like, oh, why doesn't why don't people win more against rogue then if they have this weakness? Because it's really hard.
Yeah.
It's the same reason why people are just like, oh, why can't people just play around Super Collider, right? It's like, because it's really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Easier said than done in a format in which you're drafting suboptimal cards and in which your deck is not cohesive, right? But anyways, hopefully that gives you guys some insight on how rogues play and what they're comfortable with, so you can attack that weakness and attack that area in which they are not as strong in. Don't give them the opportunity to flip the board just like that.
Yeah. That's it for. I don't have anything else to add on this rogue thing or warlock thing. I think we covered their strengths in this meta and weaknesses.
I think that's good. And these are 2 of the classes in which you're going to see a lot of, right? And they, facing them is similar in some ways, but very different in others, especially the way that, you sort of set up the board against rogue, right? But yep, that's good. Covered warlock and rogue. What is next?
Question from the GOAT, brought to you by our patrons. Merps, where have you been? What have you done?
I know.
Why is the only picture that we have here on the Lightforge of you with like a stick of like potato chips? and wearing the same shirt, and we all know now
First
that
of
is
all,
the only
that
shirt
was
that you
called
have.
a hot potato, and it was magnificent. Where they just fry this potato, so it's like greasy and oily and fresh, like piping hot, and it's like crispy but like soft and starchy in the middle, and they just salt it like mad. So it's like the best potato chip slash French fry I have ever had. It was glorious. Ate quite a few of those. But anyways, if you guys don't know, I visited Prague, Vienna, and Budapest. Beautiful cities. Amazing. If Natasha and I were to rank them, we'd probably rank Budapest number 1, Prague number 2, Vienna number 3. Not because Vienna sucked. It was it was amazing. It's just
about to
all
say,
three cities
people are
are
usually
exactly.
like huge on Vienna.
You know, I liked Vienna a lot. It's just I liked how the city was laid out and all of the architecture in Budapest more. I would say Vienna's architecture is a little bit more uniform, you know, but Budapest has just and the vibe of the city itself. You know, like Budapest is just really bohemian, and it's just there's an influx of just all of these different people. It was awesome. Ate a ton of food, and we got to you know, learn a bit of history about all of the cities as well. So amazing trip. And now we're back. Back to the
now
arena.
back to Washington D.C., the
Yeah, I know.
capital of the United States of America.
Just the swamp town that is DC.
It
Gosh.
was a terrible decision to build the capital there. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's a swamp town.
Oh my god, why? You could have picked anywhere.
It's a swamp town, and the infrastructure sucks. Anyways, I don't want to get too much about how DC sucks. So I just want to say we had a great time in Budapest, Vienna, and Prague. And it was great because we had never been to that part of Europe before. We traveled around Western Europe, and it's just a completely different sort of flavor.
Awesome. This is a question from the GOAT, brought to you by our patrons. Our patrons, our top patrons for the month of September. Thank you guys very much. It's at patreon.com if you're thinking of contributing and helping feed the GOAT. We really appreciate it, and it means a lot to our ability to continue running the GOAT. And our top patrons for the month are 4P, Afro Ninja TB, Brand New, Ingo, Kirby 5 Life, Talon, Trash Bear Bites, Trash Bear Bites, Zaruvi. Thank you guys so much for your support, and yeah, I hope you guys stick with us on the Patreon.
Thank you guys. Okay, so that brings us to the last topic of the day, which is card good bad, and we are talking about, I would say, one of the new boogeyman of the arena. You know, people have talked about MCT, and people have talked about Giggling Inventor, and this card is a card that a lot of people are sort of raising flags about now, which is Fungalmancer. All right, and a lot of the complaints on Arena HS are just
and
one,
we're talking about for like weeks. We haven't talked about it because we were like, oh, this is gonna go away, and then it like didn't, and then it didn't, and we're like, okay, I guess we should talk about Fungalmancer. Because it's like, what? I mean, okay, let's. Why don't you explain why the change, right? Fungalmancer is not a new card. It existed. When did Fungalmancer enter the meta? It was like a while ago. It's like kobolds and catacombs, right? Like with the fungal stuff.
Yeah.
Like, so it's been around for what is this, like eight months now, before all of a sudden it was catapulted into the spotlight by the release of the latest expansion, Boomsday. So what happened?
Right. So as you said, it's not a new card at all. And has it always been good? Yeah, it's always been good.
It's always been underbucketed. We've always had it as one of the like more underbucketed cards.
Once again, if you guys are not aware, Fungalmancer is at the it's in the 5th bucket right now. It's in the 5th bucket, which means that it is underbucketed. Like 5th bucket, you have some decent cards, but you also have some very like meh cards.
In its bucket, the average card is something like a 115, and Fungalmancer is a 132. It is the highest card in its bucket in neutral, outside of Stubborn Gastropod, which is even higher.
Yeah, and Stubborn Gastropod, it's that card will vary. Like for Rogue, you kind of might not need it, right? But anyways, Fungalmancer. So what happened with it? Well, the meta changed, and once again, we have board states in which it's harder to clear on both sides. So Fungalmancer is easier to hit. Once you Fungalmancer, the opponent has less initiative / board clears to deal with this now. And there's something just, I wouldn't say magical, but there is something kind of very perfect about +2/+2, right? +2/+2 has always just been like, if you have something that's just a little bit behind or, sort of equal stats, +2/+2 is like just enough to bump you to kill off a minion and leave a body behind. So being able to do that twice in one turn and leave 2 bodies behind, in this meta in which you're going to have the tokens / bodies to do it. And once you do it, they can't remove you. It's just more likely to hit and more game winning than before.
Yep. It's more tokens. There's more tokens. It gets triggered. It's always been good. Like, people may also, like, the haters, the people who have not experienced the might of the Fungalmancer will look at it and say it's 5 mana, 6 stats, right? That's not terribly bad. We've seen this before in many different places. It's also conditional stats. Like, what's the big deal? Well, Wise Blessing of King's good. It's 4 mana for 8 stats. Should be pretty bad. It's because when you buff something, you get to use it immediately and it has initiative, and that's a totally different calculation than just like counting stats on the board. So that's why Fungalmancer was always underbucketed. It was always good, and now it's even better because the situations it used is appearing more frequently. So the question is it overpowered? And whenever a question like that happens, I go back and I think of the cards that we really thought were overpowered for various metas that we had problem with. Primordial Drake always comes into mind for me. I know Keeper of Oldemon from Merps is like his boogeyman from way back in the day. And all of them have basically one thing in common. They're essentially spells with a body attached to them. They have initiative. They do stuff, right? And the ones that we had less trouble with were always the ones that were much more conditional, but not too conditional. Like, that's like the MCT or BGH rule, right? Like, conditional makes it acceptable. Being too conditional that you have no reason ever to play around it, but then it completely wins the game, goes bad again. There's like a zone of conditionalness that makes the card like not a problem, and then it becomes a problem, like way more of a problem even than before. And what we never found too troubling is something like Bone Mare. If you remember back, if you go back a year, when the pre-nerf Bone Mare, which was 7 mana.
7 mana.
For a 5/5 that buffs something 4/4 and has a taunt to it, that as soon as we saw it, we're like, this card's like definitely like super overpowered, and why would you ever do this? Why is it not like 8 mana or did something less? Like, before the game even came out. And then the game came out, the expansion came out, and we looked at it and we're like, yeah, it's a super powerful card, you should always pick it. But then it's like, should you ban this card? Should you nerf this card? I don't think we were ever on board with nerfing the card or banning the card from an arena perspective.
No, definitely not.
Whereas with Primordial Drake, I think that card should be nerfed a little. And the reason for that really comes to who are you helping, right? Like, Fungalmancer is a little bit of a snowbally card, but not even too much of a a snowbally card. It's a pretty limited ability to snowball, right? Like, it snowballs by +4. On the other hand, Primordial Drake comes back at you, not by 4 stats, not by 4 attacks worth of stats, but by possibly 7 times 2 or 14 worth of stats. Now, that's a very rare occasion that's going to hit 7 things and deal 2 damage to them, but it's possible. And even at its normal usage rate, it'll deal something like 6 damage rather than 4, right? And the difference is, 1 deals that damage when you're behind. So if you're looking at fairness, it's dealing 6 on average, maybe even 8, depending on how long you think you can hold that card in your hand. But like, something in the 6 to 8 range, I think, is pretty normal. And Fungalmancer deals 4. Always 4. Literally capped. So Primordial Drake is always a lot more problematic in terms of how unfair it is. But it helps people who are losing. Fungalmancer helps people who are winning. And if
Yeah.
you're already losing, that extra 4 is backbreaking. If you're already losing, that 6 that's helping you come back doesn't feel that terrible. It doesn't feel that terrible to your opponent, and it doesn't feel that powerful to you. Why? Because you're still losing. Even though, mathematically, even though, fairness-wise, you're getting way more out of the card than you should. Like, in terms of the swing. It swings it more. So that's the difference between what I think... I'm going to call them normal people. I don't mean, like, bad people. I mean people with average win rates, people with good win rates, even. The feeling's the same, right? If you're a good player and you're losing and you play Primordial Drake and you're still losing, you still don't think that, like, you did something amazingly, like, super powered. Whereas if you're fungaling and you were, like, winning by a little, and now you've, like, sealed the game up, you're like, that was really good. Or vice versa, right? If you're just behind by a little and they fungal and you have no shot at the game, you're like, well, that was terrible. Whereas if you're up by a lot and then they kind of catch up a bit, you're like, oh, okay, let's keep going. But the feeling of the card does not affect the actual fairness of the card. They're entirely separate. One is emotional, one is logical. And the logical side of Fungalmancer is in no way, shape, or form problematic. That's why Blizzard, in its audacity, even puts it in the 5th bucket. Like, Bone Mare was in the 1st bucket, like, as soon as they bucketed it, and that was the nerf version, right? Why? Because it was really kind of ridiculously statted. Fungalmancer is pretty appropriately statted for a good premium, like, ish kind of, like, card. We have it at a 132. We have so many cards above a 132, even in the neutrals, right? Like, Argent Commander is a 132.
Right.
It's fine.
So,
it just feels terrible.
It feels terrible. Once again, I don't want people to be like, whoa, like, ADWCTA thinks Fungalmancer is fine as it is. I think we are both agreeing, like, it is not properly bucketed.
Oh, yeah, no, it's not properly bucketed
Yeah,
at all.
yeah, exactly.
And that means, because it's not properly bucketed, and because it's actually in the lowest bucket it can be without getting an offering penalty, like, if it was 1 bucket lower, you'd actually see it less often. Because there's an offering penalty. We figure that out, like, how the, like, huge effect about it with that giant in the Taverns of Time meta, where they actually like raised the bucket because they're like, we super misbucketed this card and we'll move it up 2 buckets, and it went from, like, not being offered at all to being offered, but still under bucketed, so dominating the entire meta. Like, it was really silly. So Fungalmancer is in the lowest bucket it can be to be the most problematic in terms of bucketing, because you still see it everywhere. It's always correct to take it.
Which is by far the worst place to be.
Yeah.
Like, so right now where Fungalmancer is, it is the worst it can be for the health of, like, a Fungalmancer meta, right? In which case, if you don't like Fungalmancer, you're like, you look at where it is right now, and it is the worst.
Yep. You can move it up a bucket, you can move it down a bucket, it would all make it better.
So yeah, like, I think the bottom line is it is definitely misbucketed, and it is sometimes backbreaking on turn 5. Is it problematic in the way that ADWCTA and I, like, both of us, think Primordial Drake is? No. It is problematic in the way that, like, Bone Mare is, right? And look, some of you out there might not agree with us. That's totally fine. This is something in which people of different skill levels and even very high skill levels will disagree with.
It's an agreement about game design and how games should be designed. It's the blue shell mechanic argument, and we keep bringing it up because it's exactly what it is. It's how fair do you think the blue shell is? Logically, the blue shell is totally unfair. It literally is super powerful and rewards people who are behind. But if you think people who are behind should be rewarded for being behind, like, that makes no sense to me in a game that should be, about skill and luck, right? Like at least luck is even, right? Like, bombs get thrown everywhere.
Right.
Some are controllable, some are even totally uncontrollable. But this is reverse. This literally rewards being behind. So if you think that is something that should happen and is good game design, and therefore fair, or maybe fairness doesn't matter, maybe it's just good for the game, even if it's, like, unfair technically, like, that's one way to view it. But that's the way you view how games should be. That's the way you view about how Hearthstone should be as an experience. Mathematically, logically, on a pure, like, let's reward the player who is better Fungalmancer's not a problem, and Primordial Drake may be a problem. It's definitely more of a problem than Fungalmancer.
It's more of a problem, right? I don't want to say is like this is yes, this is no.
Yeah.
That's not it as well. This is a slider, right? And we are somewhere on the slider. You might be somewhere else.
Well,
on
I'm all the way on the slider of I don't care how people feel.
Well, no.
I'm literally far end of one side of the slider. No blue shells.
Yeah, I see the caring about how much people feel slider is very different from the how much we should reward winning versus losing kind of. Yeah, the blue shell slider, which is different from the caring how people feel slider.
Yeah, no, right? That's fair.
I want to separate those. Yeah. But anyways, I think that's good, and I think we needed to talk about Fungalmancer because it is kind of this card that has become, past Giggling Inventor. It's one of the defining cards.
It is,
right? Like people
and you have to
really
are
talking about.
You have to play around it because it's neutral. It's everywhere, and if they get offered it, they're probably going to pick it. And every time I don't pick it, chat gets so mad at me. I'm like, we don't have a deck that uses Fungalmancer. We don't have tokens. Like, we're not going to be ahead on the board. I love Fungalmancer, right? Like, but that's just not the right card for the deck. But people are in this mindset that's like, see a Fungalmancer, take a Fungalmancer. No, it's a Fungalmancer. It's a 132. It's not a Fan of Knives, which is like a 160 whatever, 162, right? It's 30 points below a Fan of Knives. It's not see a Fungalmancer, take a Fungalmancer.
But it will create some feel bad moments. And what it will do is on turn 5, close out games. And for some people, like you said, that's a little bit too early to close out the game. And more importantly, absolutely crush you and confirm to you that the game is closed, which is different, right? Which is different. Because sometimes the game is closed on turn 5 by what they do, but your feeling is, well, it hasn't closed to the same degree as Fungalmancer.
Because I have a 2% chance to win.
Right.
Whereas they fungled, and now I only have a 0.002% chance to win, and that feels a lot worse.
Yeah. And I think this is important to discuss because in discussions about Fungalmancer, I don't think people tease this out as much, right? It's just this general question of, is Fungalmancer problematic? But we have to tease out sort of like, and once again, there is no correct answer because it is just about how you view game design and how you view sort of this like feeling that people get, and also how much you want to reward the ability to come back versus the ability to lock down a win. But we do need to discuss this.
Yeah. Like, what do you think is better? Holding on to that 2% chance of hope for a player as opposed to the 0.002%, which they might as well just concede? I don't know. Is that better for a game? Wouldn't you rather the other person just concede?
I don't know. Like, once again, there is no correct answer here, right?
But what I do want to point out for this is that there is a debate, and there should be a debate, because this is not a clear-cut issue. And if there's a debate on it and you're wondering why people can see so differently than you on this card that's been around for 8 months and like nothing's really like, changed hugely about how the card functions, it hasn't been buffed, hasn't been nerfed, rules haven't changed. It's because this really teases out what you value in a game and what you think is good for the game that you're playing. And, like I am very much on Fungalmancer's side, as in not a problematic card, like just one of the premium, the super misbucketed, but always super misbucketed.
So if you're saying it's problematic because it's bucketed incorrectly,
there's so many misbucketed cards though.
Sure.
Right? Look at right below it: Void Ripper 128, Violet Worm 127, all misbucketed. Stubborn Gastropod's above it and being misbucketed. People don't complain about those cards that much because they don't feel as bad. Okay. That's card good bad, Fungalmancer. We are going to have a discussion on the next week's card good bad on our Reddit. We're going back to that. We haven't before. We did it for a bit before Boomsday, and then the expansion came out, and we're just like, we're going to talk about expansion cards as they come out. But we're going back to that. So if you go on our Reddit in the next couple days, it should go up with our next card good bad, which we have not yet determined. But if you also have ideas for our next card good bad and you want us to talk about a particular card, like tweet it at us, or just like make it known. We read all of our tweets, we read stuff on our Reddit, and then we'll pick one in a couple days. So yeah, that's card good bad. And you have anything else to say before we end the episode?
Nope. I'm back. We're gonna be bringing you a lot more, consistent arena content. Hopefully, knock on wood. But it feels good to be back, and that's it for this week.
Oh my god. I forgot to hit record.
Oh my god. Okay, well, until next time, this is Merps who hit record. That's ADWCTA who didn't do the one thing he was supposed to do for this
I'm
freaking
running the
podcast.
stream. I have to do a whole lot of stuff for this as well.
For the purposes of the podcast, the one thing that he had to do, this is us signing off. He is not going to say anything more because he is shamed. This is Merps. That's Shameful ADWCTA. See you guys next week.